What is up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to another video. I'm Nerd Kingdom, and here we're going to be taking a look at different campaign settings for 5th edition. Now, not all the books I'm going to be talking about here are from 5th edition, but I'm going to be recommending some books that I would recommend to some of my closest friends, and hopefully you guys find this really useful if you're looking for a new campaign setting for your games. I also wanted to apologise about the fan you can probably hear in the background. We're still going through a heat wave here in the UK, and it is just absolutely ridiculous. I would not be able to record this video without a fan on in the background just to try and keep me cool. Now, the first one we have is the Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide, and in my opinion it is one of the most lackluster campaign setting books that you can find on the market. It just gives us information on the Sword Coast region of Faerun, as opposed to the entirety of Faerun, which your players may be more interested in exploring. And even then, it doesn't give us a great deal of information. We're still left guessing at certain bits of information. We're still left without key pieces of knowledge, and with certain land masses or certain sections just completely left without descriptions. What I will say about Faerun in general is that it's more traditional D&D game. Magic is, somewhat common. People know about it. It's definitely like a high fantasy game. There's dragons flying around. It's a really interesting setting to use, and I think it makes a fun introductory version to the game. And I think that D&D and 5th edition have done the right call here by making this the primary setting for 5th edition. But at the same point, I think that it's definitely not for everybody, and especially with such a lackluster introduction to it with the Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide, I think people will be wanting more. Now, we are given some expansions to the Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide. We're given some more information about Faerun in some adventures. For example, we get information about Chult in the Tomb of Annihilation. We get information on the city of Waterdeep in Waterdeep Dragon Heist, and information on Baldur's Gate in Descent into Avernus. But these are kind of band-aids on a much greater wound. When you have to rely on adventures to make up for the lack of content contained in a campaign setting sourcebook, then you know that there's a bigger problem at work there. If you are looking to run a game in Faerun, which I highly recommend doing, that's where my home game is currently set, then I definitely recommend picking up the 4th edition's Forgotten Realms campaign guide. That is going to give you way more information on the entirety of Faerun, and it's going to actually give you a detailed tear-out map that you can put in front of your players as well, containing the entirety of Faerun, not just the Sword Coast region. So give that a look if you are looking to run a game in Faerun and haven't yet had a chance to read through this. It is a little bit outdated as of 5th edition, but that really doesn't matter because the quality of the content in here is just so easy to bring up to date. Now, 5th edition has also tried to bring up to date Eberron. Eberron is a much less generic setting, and I think the reason for that is because it is so like steampunky. That's often the term associated with Eberron. Basically, it's very industrialized. Magic is intrinsically linked with this world, and we were first introduced to it for 5th edition with the Wayfinder's Guide to Eberron, which was later basically expanded upon and released as a proper book in Eberron Rising from the Last War, which is again a fantastic piece of information. Generally, magic in this setting is linked to the world very closely, and as such, you will find that, general household items have like a magical twist. For example, I heard somebody say that a washing machine is just a box that casts prestidigitation on clothes to clean them. So it kind of has that sort of vibe on it. It's interesting, it's a bit weird, but it's a really interesting and fantastic setting to set your games in. Additionally, Eberron Rising from the Last War is a fantastic place to start because it also gives you a great map of Corvia, which is the main continent of the world. And again, this is a war-torn or recovering from a giant war-like setting. So it's a really interesting scenario, world events happening, and there's a big opportunity for adventure within this world. Now, I'd be kicking myself if I didn't talk at least a little bit about Barovia, because we were, of course, introduced to the realms of terror in 5th edition with Curse of Strahd. And Curse of Strahd is a fantastic adventure, giving us Barovia itself, but it is a small part of a larger whole, the core, the world of Ravenloft, the realms of terror, and I'm saying that plural, because the Realms of Terror was a much larger part of the game, and it was its own full campaign setting in, I think, 2nd edition or AD&D, and unfortunately there's no real way of updating you fully on this. They don't have source books for the entirety of the Realms of Terror, unless you want to go ahead and pick up a bunch of box sets. Too many to even count, I think. If you were looking for a dark fantasy setting and you are looking for kind of like a gothic horror theme for your D&D games, then looking at Ravenloft and checking out maybe some of those older AD&D adventures is a good way of going about it. If you also check out on DM's Guild, you'll find a gentleman by the name of Oliver Clegg. I have no affiliation with this gentleman, but Oliver Clegg has released a few updated for 5th edition versions of these older Realms of Terror, so it's definitely worth taking a look at him. Now, if you guys are a fan of Critical Role, then of course you know that I have to talk about Matt Mercer's campaign world of Exandria. We have 2 continents currently fleshed out for our enjoyment, and that is Tal'Dorei, represented in the Tal'Dorei campaign setting, which you can pick up, I believe you can pick it up on Amazon or maybe even in your local game shops. And also we have Wildmount, which has been recently released in the Explorer's Guide to Wildmount. Both books are absolutely phenomenal, and I recommend them both, even if you don't plan on running your own game there. It is a traditional fantasy world, by which I mean that there's nothing really quirky going on here, but it is a very, very, very great example of a fantasy world. These books flesh out an existing world to an incredible degree, and it's really a pleasure to read through. There are some great concepts, loads of exploration and design. I have a detailed video talking about Explorer's Guide to Wildmount if you wanted to check that out, just to see if it was for you, but I highly recommend this to all players. One of the oldest fantasy worlds for D&D is, of course, Greyhawk, and unfortunately we've been given no information currently for Greyhawk in 5th edition, and you can originally find Greyhawk in part of a box set for, I think it's AD&D, but generally Greyhawk is a large and fantastic world. It is such a fan favourite because a lot of people, especially people who've been playing D&D for a long time, cut their teeth on Greyhawk as their first campaign setting, so it has a very special place in a lot of people's hearts. We were introduced to aspects of Greyhawk in 5th edition. For example, in the Ghosts of Saltmarsh, Saltmarsh is within the Greyhawk setting traditionally. However, as for a 5th edition Greyhawk setting, we've not really been given one yet. So my next best recommendation is from 3rd edition, and it is the Greyhawk Gazetteer. I highly recommend taking a look at that if you fancy checking out this old, fantastic fan favourite. Now, 5th edition has introduced us to a couple of other campaign settings, and you can't see it, but I'm using air quotes here because this just... I'm not big fans of these ones. We have the Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica, and of course we have the Mythic Odysseys of Theros. Now, both these books are interesting books to read through, but I think they make terrible campaign settings. If you're a fan of Magic the Gathering, which I am, then you will have a lot of interest in reading through these books and seeing what is introduced and offered up for D&D. For example, I think the mythical creatures is a really interesting concept and I love it. However, Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica doesn't really include a map. I mean, it includes a map, but the map is so confined and restricted that I don't even think it's worth mentioning. And then the Mythic Odysseys of Theros, the land we're given contains a handful of places, very close and well knit together, meaning that I feel like exploration of this world and kind of the themes and atmosphere of it is more left up to the DM's imagination. But if you are a DM looking to expand upon some pre-written lore, I mean, places like Eberron, places like the Forgotten Realms and, Faerun, and Greyhawk. These are all campaign settings that are well documented and have a lot of written lore ready for your consumption. But if you are looking to bring your own slice of pie to the table, then I think a campaign setting like Theros is a good way of going about it. But for anyone looking to have a full, really rich campaign setting, Theros just doesn't offer us much. The last one that I really want to mention here is Dark Sun. Dark Sun is a fantastic, really interesting, wacky world. And again, we're not really introduced to it in 5th edition, but we have a great offering from 4th edition, which is the campaign guide. And Dark Sun is this great, like, Mad Max, full desert-style world. If you're a fan of Mad Max, if you're a fan of Dune, if you're a fan of any of that kind of genre, you will pretty much love this as a campaign setting. The idea is that the setting of this world is that the world is dying. The entire world is just this one giant desert. Metal is incredibly rich, and also there are no gods. So it is this godless world where mages and magic users, who's by just casting spells end up destroying the world around them. They rule with an iron fist. There are slaves. It's very dark. It's very gritty. It's very unforgiving, and that is a great campaign setting if you fancy running that kind of game. This is definitely a survival kind of setting. It's not one where you're looking at becoming heroes of the land, but if you're looking for something like that, then I highly recommend checking out the 4th edition product. And if you've checked out the 4th edition product and still want some more, then I recommend checking out the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons box set for 2nd edition. And the Dark Sun box set for this is absolutely fantastic, and I do recommend this product. It is really, really neat to delve into this old and fascinating setting. The last thing I want to recommend to you guys is if you guys are interested in new, rich, vibrant, interesting settings, then there are loads that are constantly offered up on Kickstarter, and I highly recommend supporting the community and checking some of those out. One that I checked out recently and has become my absolute favourite is Grim Hollow. Grim Hollow is a dark fantasy setting. It is filled with transformations and that kind of stuff. It is gritty, it is realistic. I really enjoy the book that has recently been released, having a chance to read through it. If you guys are a fan of Curse of Strahd and that kind of unforgiving, horror-styled world, then I highly recommend giving Grim Hollow a look. I'll put a link to their website. They have a fantastic map and a fantastic world created, and it's an interesting setting that I recommend taking a look at. Well guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope you've really enjoyed this video, and I hope it's helped some people. It's just a quick overview. I would love to go more in depth into these campaign settings, but I thought before I do anything like that, it's best to just give you a rough overview of these campaign worlds and talk about a couple of my favourites and maybe what I think of them. I recommend checking out a couple of these products if you haven't already. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one.